The Secrets of Technology is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Technology. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Technology, where we discuss the technology news that's important to you from a uniquely Catholic point of view. And joining me today on the panel is Pat Scott. Hey, Pat.
Hi there.
It is Ash Wednesday as we were recording this, so a blessed Lent, almost an admit, a blessed Lent to you all. It is the evening here, so I've been fasting all day. and
happy Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's. I have a little low blood sugar right now, so if you have to excuse me if I act a little loopy in this show. But no, we're glad to have all of you listeners here, and we're happy to jump into Lent. And I think there's a Lent angle to our topics today, but we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I do want to mention that there is another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found or at mysterious.fm. And yeah, we get some great topics, by the way, coming up in some really interesting mysteries coming up on the show. So you should definitely check it out. We've got an episode this very week, if you're listening the day this releases, on pet telepathy. It's kind of fascinating.
Oh my goodness.
And then next week is a really interesting one. There's a legend that a priest, not even just a legend, this was reported in all the newspapers of the day 100 years ago or so. The 50s, not the 100 years, I think it was the 50s. This priest reported that he had invented the chronovisor, a machine for looking at anything in the past, and had proof. Let me just leave it there. This was a priest at the Vatican. So, definitely check it out. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And you find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at mysterious.fm. So we are not talking about chronovisors. Chronovisor is kind of a tech thing, so I thought to give that a mention. But what we are talking about today is how do you find reliable news sources? And this is a tech topic because so much of our news we gather through social media, online, so much of that. And so much of it is connected to the tech we use. And so I want to talk about how we can use our tech and to find good sources of news, reliable news sources. And before we, talk about some of those, so first I'll give a little bit of my background in journalism. I've been head of StarQuest Network for 5 years now. I've done podcasting for a long time. I worked at a diocese and parishes before that. But my background, my original career was in journalism, Catholic journalism. I originally worked for the very first online Catholic news service back in the mid-90s. Yes, there was an online in the mid-90s called Catholic World News. Actually, when we started, we were EWTN News. We were EWTN News, the two of us. Then we became independent Catholic World News. I worked for a magazine called Catholic World Report Magazine, where I was the editor for a time. I've worked in radio. I worked in local Catholic radio here in Boston. And then I've also done diocesan media and bulletins. I've done pretty much everything that you could consider media and journalism, except I kind of have done TV, but not really. I mean, I've helped out the Catholic TV station here in Boston, but that wasn't really my job. So that said, I've been involved in Catholic journalism, Catholic news for a long time. And so I bring that with me to this topic. Now, we're not talking about just Catholic news. We're talking about all news. Pat, what is your relationship to the news? And when I say that, it's like, are you a news junkie, or are you just someone who casually follows the news?
I set aside around an hour a day to go online and look at news sources that I trust. And other than that, unless there's a breaking news story, I don't pay attention to the news. I don't pay attention to news on social media. if I see anything there that people are talking about, I'll go get off and go look at another source. But no, I'm not a news junkie. I'm a let me know what is important, but I don't dwell on it.
Yeah. If there's an earthquake, I want to know about it.
Right.
That sort of thing. And that's actually brings up the very first point is how much news is good? How much news is enough for the average person? Do we need as much news as we're getting these days for most of us or many of us? Should we be trying to consume as much news as we do? And I bring that up because I find like a lot of people, friends, and I found it with myself even, the longer I spend on certain social media, like especially like on Twitter, when I was really heavy into Twitter, which is all news discussion, people talking about the news all the time, I found myself becoming anxious and stressed and getting into arguments with people online, and it wasn't good for me. I realized that having that much access to a constant stream of news articles and opinions about the news and all that sort of stuff left me unhappy, stressed, not in a good place. And I feel like that's the first place to start with when assessing reliable news sources, is just to assess how much news do I need?
Well, and that was a conscious decision on my part. In years past, I would spend a lot more time on it, and I just decided I needed to limit it. I needed to get to places that were not emotionally charged news sources, and just say, get the high points of things, skim it, go into depth on the things I was interested in, but not, don't listen to it on the radio, don't watch it on TV. Just get it kind of, in a sense, almost a passive news source, as opposed to being actively involved.
I think back to how, like, my parents, who were older than you, my parents would get news, or you
a little.
Yeah, I'm being kind here. Be kind to your mother-in-law, and how your parents got the news, which is they got a newspaper every day, probably. And there was
the radio.
And there was the radio. And then I remember as a kid, we had the 6 o'clock news every day. They had the local news at 6 and the national news at 7 for a half hour. And that was it. And that was all the news you needed. And we were not worse off for it. In fact, we were probably better off. But because we have this constant fire hose of news and information, I think it makes us more anxious. I
think so too.
Also prone to manipulation and disinformation, and I think that's not good for us individually or as a society.
Right. Well, that I see people that are just totally, absorbed by it and upset, and getting really involved emotionally with the news, and I can't think that that's good.
Right.
And a lot of times, especially on TV, you see the same incident over and over and over again, and it starts taking on an importance in your mind that it wouldn't if you'd just seen it once.
Right.
But they keep coming back to the same thing and showing a few more pictures, or sometimes even just the same clips.
Right. And as tragic as it is, do I need to know about the kidnapping of a child 1,000, 2,000 miles away from me in a form that is like, this is a present danger and breaking news? And it's like, it's a constant diet of that. For example, just saying for that, like as a parent, it makes me more concerned, more worried that these sorts of bad things happening to kids is more frequent than it is, and it's not. But it creates this intensity in our minds. Well, and the other issue that is a current issue in for folks who are consuming news is siloing, which is getting all your news from one source or one kind of source that is biased, or at least has a very narrow perspective. And so all you're getting is a very narrow perspective, a very narrow context, perhaps, or narrow interpretation of what's going on. And so you start to get this sense that things aren't we end up having, what's the best way to put this? Sometimes we think this is the reality of the world because we're getting this constant flow of this one perspective. And you talk to someone who's getting a different one, and their perception of the reality of the world is entirely different. They're living in literally living in a different world, and it's not literally, but in some sense, living in a different world than I am, because they're getting a whole different. It's the same events, the same news, but the way that they're receiving it, what is being fed to them about it is very different. And I think those are some. So you get disinformation and a fire hose of information and siloing of information. And I think those are the three big problems that I really think we can address. We're talking about finding reliable news sources. So
right.
So the first thing is to figure out what do I need to know? What do I need to follow? And I kind of categorize this three different categories of news. There's local news, national news, and international news. And for me, the most important news is the local news. And I think a lot of people would maybe disagree, but I think the stuff that's happening in my town, well, first in my neighborhood, then in my town, and then in my state, I think of those are the local issues that are most present to me, most affect me, my family, my work life, my professional life, that sort of thing. And so I categorize the importance of the news I get based on these levels. National news is next, and international news is at that highest level. And then I put news about my faith, Catholic faith, on the same level. My parish, what's going on in my parish, what's going on in my diocese, and what's going on in the church at large. And that's to me, in some senses, the least important news to me. And so we can get into some of that as we go. But I'm curious, do you have a categorization like that of the hierarchy or importance of news for you?
Well, I can see where local news is things not only that affect me personally, but that I could have some impact on. And so that's one of the things about local news is that, I see something, I react to it. And maybe if it's something that I might participate in.
Yep.
If there's an event coming up that I say, oh, this is something I really should be involved in, where you can't do that with national and international news. So I see that as being pretty important.
Yeah.
I think it can get down to too small a microcosm. Neighborhood news, sometimes some of the news groups and stuff that cater to those, I am not going to spend my time on lost dogs anymore, right. Or who's parked outside of my house. Those are just unhealthy news sources.
Those go from
at that point.
Yeah, those go from news to gossip and rumor and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's true.
And rumor mongering, a lot of it.
Yeah,
and prejudice. There's a lot of prejudicial things that show up in the neighborhood news.
Yeah,
that I'm not real happy about.
Right. So in that case, like Facebook groups for your town or your neighborhood, or what is the app? The neighborhood next door.
Next door, yeah.
Next door, yeah.
That's what I couldn't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I use those as a infrequent source of I need to check out to see who's recommending such and such a plumber or whatever, right. That type of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. So how do we assess what makes a reliable news source? And so I got some steps, I can mention some things I want to mention. First is to think about what is their authority and reputation. So where do they get their news from? What is their source of news? Do they have their own independent reporters who go out reporting? Do they get it from wire services? Are they just repackaging, repeating stuff they get over like for press releases or over a wire service? Sometimes you see in Google News, you'll see these stories like the Hindustan Times reporting on something going on in Chicago, and you're like, what is that? I had this one thing where people were freaking out because there was a story about this Catholic priest in Boston who was denying something about the Trinity, the doctrine of the church, and I'm like, yeah. And it was like in this like Indian Daily Times or India Daily Times thing, and I'm like,
it's not relevant.
Yeah. Well, also, I double checked, but there was no priest by that name. There is no parish by that name. Like this never happened. It just was completely made up from whole cloth. So like, what is the source of the news? Where's this news coming from? What is their reputation? That's really, do they have a reputation for accuracy? And of course, longevity alone isn't everything. And there are media sources out there who are over 100 years old, whose accuracy I don't necessarily trust. Right. So, so that's one thing. And also beware of sound biting, and not just like, this isn't just a thing in the TV. It started with TV news, but snippets of news that don't give enough context, that are like social media posts or memes or infographics. They're cited with authority according to Newsweek magazine. 5 out of 10 blonde people are secretly mass murderers. Oh my goodness, no! Like, what's the source of that? Where's that data come from? Is that an accurate quote? Or and so that sort of thing. This is a little bit of skepticism has to be built in as well to when you assess news and news sources. So there's that. Then one of the things I would recommend too is avoid the silo problem by consulting a variety of news sources across multiple viewpoints. Whether you think of in terms of liberal or conservative, or West Coast, East Coast, North and South, Pats fan, Giants fan, and Yankees fan, Sox fan, whatever it is, multiple sources, multiple viewpoints, and then ask yourself, are they all reporting the same story? Are they reporting it the same way? How do they differ? Why do you think those stories are different? And so, ask yourself these things. And I do this all the time. I will look at the news. My as you mentioned your habit, I have a habit of every morning I consult my news sources, and we'll talk about the ones that you and I both, we'll both talk about the ones we prefer in a little bit, but I consult them, and then I see the same story crop up across them, and I think to myself, well, that's interesting that this one quotes this person here and says this about the issue, but this one doesn't, and then they say something, and then they reveal this interesting detail that the first one didn't, and now I start to get a bigger picture of what's going on that kind of cuts across viewpoint bias, shall we say?
Right.
So I think it's a really important thing is to avoid falling into the silo of news media and of various biases. Bias alone is not bad. We all have our biases, or we're all have our viewpoints. I don't think any news source is completely objective. They should strive for objectivity, but you gotta be careful as you read them. How biased are they?
Right.
So there. And speaking of bias, there is a chart by a company or a website called allsides.com. They have a media bias chart, and they take some of the bigger or more well-known media sources, and they place them on a chart from, hard left wing, leaning left, center, right leaning, and hard right, or I don't know if they say hard, but left and right. And they place them on and I look at the chart. I mostly agree with it. A few things I'm a little like, that's a little odd that you put that one way over there. I think that guy should be a little over there, but mostly it's pretty good. Although other people dispute the journalists dispute the usefulness or fairness of these media bias charts. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I've seen several things that do try to say which ones tend to be objective and which ones tend to have a particular slant or a particular focus that is different from the rest, and it does help to kind of reassess which ones you're looking at.
Right. Yeah, like this one, the chart puts Newsweek as a center, and Reuters in the center, as sort of unbiased. And I'm thinking, those seem a little more left leaning to me. Those should be a little more to the left, and that doesn't seem like the right place for it. But again, people's opinions will vary, so that's fine. The idea is
you might have columnists in there that some of the columnists lean one way, some of the other, and overall the whole organization or the whole news source is a combination of fairly middle. But you could have individuals in there that have their own pitch.
And they do break out some of the sources, like Wall Street Journal. They break out their news from opinion, so they know their opinion sections lean right, but their news is more center, more unbiased either direction, which is interesting. And so they do that with several of the different organizations. So, a couple more points. Just because you disagree with the viewpoint or bias or however you want to put it of a particular news source doesn't make them wrong. But just because they might be wrong, and just because they're wrong sometimes doesn't mean you shouldn't see what they have to say. You know what I mean? So sometimes you disagree with their viewpoint. They make an assertion in a news story and you say, no, that's wrong. But that doesn't mean that that they are. So you gotta be open-minded, put it that way. But you also have to be wary that, when they are wrong, you still need to know what people are saying that you disagree with. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Does that come across, Pat? Is that clear?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, that basically, even though you disagree with them, they may have points that you need to hear because you've got other people that you are around you that need to know what the rest of the world is thinking. You need to know and be aware so that you can look at your own points and say, maybe I missed something. Maybe they've got a point there. So it's good to look at a lot of sides. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I've become aware more recently that there are internationally a lot of, quote, news sites, unquote, that really aren't news sites as much as they are a way to advertise. And so they will take things and come up with little snippets of news, but you'll see the same snippets in a whole bunch of news sources, the exact same snippets. And they're basically an advertising thing that happens to have news in there to make it look like they're genuine.
Yeah, I think that's what that India Times or what I was telling that story before. Yes. I think that's what it was. It was, making news-like items that drag in clicks. It's clickbait, so that they can show their ads and make money off the ad bait. Yeah.
Right, because they're hoping that somebody will get there by a search, and then they'll think, oh, here's a good news source, that type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So another point is reliable news sources are transparent about their editorial process and are accountable for their mistakes. In other words, they note their mistakes. They are clear and when they make corrections, and they're clear and prominent notices of corrections that they're made. They should have clear corrections policies and update their stories when new information becomes available and let you know that they've updated it. Those are important aspects of it. And instead of burying it somewhere. Yeah. Right. Page 3 in very small print, we changed the story. Yeah. So I already mentioned, make sure that, if the news outlet discloses their sources, how they gather and verify their information. Verification is very important. So that's important to know. Another interesting thing to think about is who owns this news outlet. Where do they get their money from? Because that can reveal potential conflicts of interest and in bias in their reporting. I take any news about Amazon from the Washington Post with a huge grain of salt because it's owned by Jeff Bezos. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're biased, but it just means I take it with a grain of salt. The fact that they're owned by them, it's just, I have to, if there's news reporting about the Amazon, I'll look at another source as well, because that just I just have to know who the owner is. I just saw something about George Soros buying a bunch of radio stations, including the ones in Boston. George Soros has a particular reputation as being very left-leaning, liberal, and liberal activist, billionaire. That's going to mean I'm going to take things that happen at those stations and in their reporting with a grain of salt. that sort of thing. So it doesn't mean that necessarily the people who work there don't have integrity. I'm not saying that, but it just means I have to weigh that in the balance. So important to understand. So we at this point we should talk about some of the news sources that we consult, Pat, and I've got kind of an extensive list. So
I see you do.
yeah, and I check them all every day. But I'll let you go first because I think you have a shorter list than I do.
Well, and yeah, basically one of the first places you talked about checking a lot of different opposing views, et cetera. I find that Google News, it draws from lots of sources. If you look at a particular topic, you've got 10 or 12 articles, and then you can see more even than those. But then you can look through do a quick skim and see what things, as you say, are common or different. But that gives me a quick overview of the topics that might be helpful to know for me to be looking at. And they have a local section and a national section and an international too. So that same place that I go can give me a lot of different sources with a lot of different backgrounds. And so that's one of the first places I look. And if I'm strapped for time, I'll do that and then go on. But then basically I've been using like BBC, looking at how does a different nation see the news from us, not just a different news sources within our nation. Because a lot of times what a international news source may see things in some particular lights that maybe internally people that are inside the system don't notice or don't see. So I like to look at BBC as well. So those are the two biggest ones that I use. I do use Reuters some, but again, I have looked at several of the things that ranked it as kind of being in the middle. So that's one of the reasons that I picked it as a possible. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I do have several news feeds that I get in email that I will quickly kind of go through, and some of them try to do a lot of fact checking in there. At the end of the articles, they'll do some fact checking on various different things too. And I found that helpful.
Interesting. So, the nice thing with the BBC, I find that their international coverage, so coverage of news outside of the UK and outside the US, tends to be a little better than most American news sources.
Yeah.
And they go in more in depth. There's less bias, I find, in either direction in their international reporting. I can't speak for their internal UK reporting and whatnot, but it's also like the BBC reporting on American news, but also the Guardian I find to be interesting sometimes. In fact, we have a Guardian story, or the Daily Mail, which I know has got a reputation as being tabloidy, but sometimes it has interesting reporting that they're first
perspectives. Yeah.
They're reporting on an American story that isn't being reported on in American sources, which I find fascinating sometimes. So it's interesting sometimes to get their stuff.
Yeah, and I've also heard Al Jazeera being mentioned as another international news source that takes a different look at the news from internal stuff. But yeah. I haven't been paying attention to that, but I've heard of that.
Yeah, I would take them with a big grain of salt because, yes, I think it would be interesting to look at the news from their perspective, but not alone, just to get a different perspective,
right? Especially
on things that are being reported on outside of conflict areas. Once you get into the reporting on conflict areas, it gets, war propaganda is a thing, so it gets a little harder.
No,
but,
yeah.
But the perspective is interesting. So I want to mention one source that I don't actually use right now, but I might start using it. But I recently had it recommended to me. It's called ground.news. That's the URL, ground news. And what they do is they try to cover every side of every story, whereas they what they do is they have multiple sources. They report it like a summary, and then they have links to multiple sources, and they show like how much of the coverage of this story is from left-leaning sources, how much is from right-leaning sources, and then they grade each of the sources that they link to. So, for example, here's a story on Biden temporarily protects Palestinians in the U.S. from deportation amid conflict abroad. Now, then there's a summary under it, and you can click one of three buttons, left, center, or right, and see the story rephrased left from a left point of view, a center point of view, and a right point of view, which is an interesting thing to do to kind of get how would different viewpoints see this. So that's kind of interesting. But then you get a list of articles, 32 articles about this from sources like Fox News, CBS News, Breitbart, WBIR, which must be a radio station, that sort of thing. So going all the way down, and then it talks about each of them. So Fox News, media conglomerate, Murdoch family, owned by the Murdoch family, mixed factuality, right wing, media conglomerate, Rupert Murdoch. So it puts these tags on it. CBS News, media conglomerate, owned by National Amusements, high factuality, leans left, so on and so forth. So it's an interesting way of presenting the news based on letting you know who the owners of these news organizations are, how do they generally
and their
lean,
reputation,
and their reputation for factuality. Now, fact checking is a whole other area of concern. So I don't want to get into that here. That's a whole nother thing to get into about fact checking, but it also lets you, gives you, so there's 32 total articles. Then you can tell it, show me all the left leaning ones, show me all the center ones, show me all the right ones, the right leaning ones. And it's an interesting way to look at the news. I may start checking this out regularly, but it's not one I look at now.
I looked at it for a while. I think I got on one of their newsletters, and after about 2 weeks, I realized I was getting too many news sources, so I cut back on some, and that was one of the ones I cut back on. I just didn't seem I get kind of the same thing when I'm doing Google News, in the sense that I've got 20 articles that I can go look at, and now of course they're not evaluating whether they're right or left, but I have the ones that I feel like are
right,
that I would want to get balancing viewpoints from.
And to be honest, it seems like a lot of work. Each story has like a lot of stuff going on.
I think I was overwhelmed by that. Yeah.
So I'm not sure I want to do that much work. So here's some other sources I look at, and my sources range the ideological gamut. From the secular news. I also have some Catholic news sources that I follow as well. So the first one I want to mention is called 1440 Daily Digest at join1440.com. And what I like about this one is it's a daily email. It usually has 2 or 3 major stories, the big stories of the day, that it in condensed form with links to learn to other news sources. So it's sort of aggregating. Then it has business like snippets, science, and then some fun stories at the end, and there's sports and that sort of thing. All very, very brief, but it's a news curator. But the best thing about it is they work really hard to be as they say, unbiased as humanly possible. They are presenting the facts of the story. And so you can get just the basic factual information about what's going on without having to worry about getting a viewpoint imposed on top of it. And that's one of the things I really like about 1440. It's quick. You can read it, in a few minutes, but it's really, it's unbiased. And I like that. So it kind of gives me, I start there and I get an unbiased start to the news day.
I've forgotten. I get that one every day too, and that's probably the first thing I do before I go to Google News. Actually, So
yes, it's really good. I recommend it. So another one I look at. So I live in the Boston area, and I read the Boston Globe, which is a long-lived newspaper. I get the e-paper, which comes via either an app. I have an iPad app, and it has the newspaper layout format. It's really nice when it works. The iPad app is a little buggy, but you get the newspaper format, and then when you want to read a story, you just tap on the article, and it makes it like in a reader form where it fills the screen and the text goes all the way across, and you can read the whole article. I really enjoy reading the paper that way. I like the newspaper format. I'm old school, but I like having it in electronic form. And I can also read it in my web browser the same way. They have an e-paper format in the browser too. Now the Globe is left leaning. There's no two bones about it. They are a liberal newspaper in a liberal town. So, and that's okay. Sometimes it gets me a little angry. I'll be honest. I pull my hair out. This is this biased, but I'm getting a different viewpoint. I'm seeing how other people see the news, see how the world is working. And I think it's important. I want to see their point of view. Now, from a more conservative viewpoint, I look at something called The Dispatch at thedispatch.com. You have to put the in there. This is a project of some conservative writers who a few years ago put this together. It's a lot of it is op-ed opinion writing, but they do some news reporting, and they send out a daily email called The Dispatch, the Daily Dispatch, where they give you summaries of news stories, national, international. It tends to lean right, although they are I don't like to get too much into politics, but just so people understand where they're coming from, they're anti-Trump, so they're a right-leaning, non-Trump news source, to put it that way. And I find their viewpoint interesting. I don't always agree with them, but I find that they provide an interesting counterpoint to the Globe, the Boston Globe. I sometimes will also look at the Boston Herald, which is the conservative local newspaper here in Boston. And I look at occasionally during the day, I'll look at Apple News. I don't, if there's breaking news, that's always the hard one for me. Where do I go for breaking news? I tend to go to CNN when there's a big story, something big in the world, a disaster or, big event. I tend to go to CNN now more than ever because Fox News has put even more stuff behind a paywall, frankly. And I find it annoying the way their website's set up. So, so those are the secular sources I generally consult. As far as Catholic sources, I have a few. I really enjoy the Pillar Catholic, pillarcatholic.com. I find their news reporting to be in depth and factual. Of course, I have to, my heart and roots of journalism are in the Catholic World News, which eventually became Catholic News at catholicculture.org. They did more news aggregating where it's links to other sources, but the curating that they do is really good. I get an email daily from an organization called catholicvote.org. They are very conservative politically. They have the Loop newsletter, but again, I find it important to know what they're writing, what they're talking about. I find it is very informative to me, even when I disagree with the way that they phrase things or the perspective that they may have on a news story. For general Catholic news, I like osvnews.com from Our Sunday Visitors, the organization. And they basically are Catholic, what used to be Catholic News Service, which was run by the Bishops' Conference. And then the Bishops' Conference shut that down, and OSV News hired a lot of people and started this news service themselves. So it's sort of, they tend to be very middle of the road in their approach. I don't tend to read the liberal news, Catholic news. There's only so much time in the day. So those are the sources I consult regularly, pretty much daily. I spend, maybe half an hour to 45 minutes a day going through it. Actually, longer than that because I read the newspaper at lunch. That's when I read the Globe, because I also do my crossword then. So probably 45 minutes to an hour a day. One of the nice things as a subscriber to the Pillar, they have a daily email newsletter called Starting 7, which kind of summarizes the news of the day, the Catholic news of the day, which is really, really handy, really well done. So So those are the reliable news sources that Pat and I consult, and the way we assess them.
Well, and when there's breaking Catholic news, I usually try to hit the Vatican, their news source. I don't tend to read a lot of online Catholic news sources. I'll have to admit I'm deficient in that, but I try to look for that where I can.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So good. So folks, what do you use for your news sources? I'd love to hear from you, or any of the ways that you get your news, how you assess news. Is news important to you? Do you limit the amount of news that you get to decrease stress and anxiety? Let us know. We'd love to follow up on this story in the future. And you can do that by emailing us at technology@sqpn.com. So before we move on, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Technology, including Andrew E., Christopher V., Natalie B., Cesar T., and Ann S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Technology and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So let's take a look at some headlines. Our first headline comes from The Guardian newspaper. And the headline is Substack faces user revolt over anti-censorship stance on neo-Nazis. So the story is that Substack, which, how to best describe it? It's like Substack is kind of the successor to blogs for many people. It's a place where you can set up your own blog-like newsletter where you publish to this site, and then it can send out an email, of your writings, and you can also charge people to, if you like, to view, if they wish to view some of your stuff or all of your stuff, you can put it behind a paywall, or you can make it free. So Substack has a very broad censorship policy, in the sense of they're very free speech oriented. They're very pro free speech, and how to best to put it? They have said that they will remove like most extreme views, but it have to be the extreme views, and some people don't like that. They don't like the fact that Substack doesn't censor people that they think should be censored. And so a number of the users, including some of the largest users, have said that they might boycott Substack. Now, one thing that's happened since this story broke, this originally started about a month ago, Substack has since taken down some of the neo-Nazi newsletters, or at least several of them, but most of them are fairly small, had under 100 regular subscribers or whatever, but said they will not censor right-wing publishers, as a lot of these folks want them to do. Pat, what do you think of this? There's a line, that here of, do we censor? Where do we draw the censorship line? When do we start saying, this viewpoint is fine, but this one a little to the side of that, to the left or right of that one, is no longer fine? What do you think of the line that they have to walk? Is it better to not have a line at all and just let the market decide?
It's hard to know, because, there are some things people would say, yes, definitely we need to censor pornography. And then you say, I also think we should censor extreme violent things, so that's two markers. Okay. And then you start getting on either side of that, and that starts getting real fuzzy, because you don't want to, you do need a place where forums and people can discuss things and come to their own decision. The cream comes to the top and the other direct gets down to the bottom. But the idea being is that you need a broad place where you can have a lot of different viewpoints and that type of thing. But yeah, extreme violence and cruelty, etc., or extreme misuse of pornography and that type of thing. It's hard to other than those two things, it's really hard to say where there should be any censorship. I think probably the marketplace is probably about the best, but you do get these little enclaves of things that are tempest in a teapot sometimes that do boil over and might incite something violent, and you don't want that.
Right. I mean, what you get is like what you're getting here in Substack is you have a bunch of people who disagree with some viewpoints and saying, I don't want to be on the same platform as people with that viewpoint. And I think
that to me, that just says that, well, don't read it.
Right. Or, I mean, move then. I mean, if that's don't be on that platform, go to another platform, but don't censor other people, I think.
Right.
I mean, there is odious stuff out there, and do we? This stuff that I think is awful and gross, but I don't know that I want to start getting in the business of saying, and you're not allowed to publish, because there are people who think that my beliefs are odious and gross. Right? So where does it end? So it's very tricky, and I'm glad I'm not in the business of being a publisher like Substack is, or a not so much a publisher as a platform like Substack or Facebook or Twitter, because it's really hard out there today to deal with these competing pressures that they're dealing with.
Well, and like, we mentioned Facebook, you get to the other point where all of a sudden everybody, things are being censored and we don't even know why. There's things that are algorithms or whatever that are blocking things that there's no sense in blocking.
Yes, right. Yeah, they just today your daughter had posted a beautiful painting of a landscape, and it was like Facebook blocked it as sensitive content, and I'm like, were the trees too sensuous or something? Like, what is going on?
Well, the other day there was a fishing nets and a fishing knife, and we figured that the knife was violence, and that's why they've, it's crazy. I've got some people that post golfing little clips of when they're doing miniature golf, and all of a sudden they're being rejected for being inappropriate, and nobody knows why. Maybe the word hole is coming up. I don't know, but something's triggering them.
That's the worst part is these algorithms won't tell you what's wrong. Like, then explain to me what I did wrong so I don't make the same mistake again. So right. I don't violate the rule, but they don't even tell you that. So, yeah.
No.
So our next headline is from Reuters, and it says the Biden administration to unveil contractor rule that could upend the gig economy. Now, what's going on here is that the Labor Department wants to reclassify contract workers, people who drive for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all these people, reclassify them as employees, not contractors. And that triggers a whole new level of regulation and laws and things that these companies have to do. And they did issue the rule, which which reversed a Trump era rule. So the rule says that, where's it go? I'm trying to see the rule. So the old rule said that workers who own their own businesses or have the ability to work for competing companies, such as a driver who works for Uber and Lyft, can be treated as contractors. But the new rule takes that out and says that no, that violated federal court decisions, and that workers have to be given a minimum wage and have to get coverage of benefits and all kinds of things like that for people who are having side hustles basically, and driving part-time. And what do you think of this, Pat? I mean, are Lyft drivers and Uber drivers and DoorDash drivers, should they be treated as employees or contractors? Are they better? Like, some people say treating them as contractors benefits the companies, but maybe not. Maybe it's better for the workers too. What do you think?
I tend to want to say they should be treated as contractors, because unless the company tells them specifically, you have to be here at certain times, you have to do these particular jobs, etc. Unless they lay out a structure, to me, it's not really an employer relationship. If they're at will in terms of, I can choose to take this job or not, or I can choose to be here these hours or not, that's a gig. That is a contractor. That's not the same as somebody who says, I'm your boss, you have to follow these rules.
Right.
Now, I understand the quandary of the individual out there that's all they're doing and they don't have insurance benefits. That's a problem with our society, that we can't manage to handle dealing with helping people get insurance when they need it for their families. But that's a separate issue from the gig versus contractor to me. I mean, the employee versus gig type.
Yeah. I did find what the old rule said. It gave weight to how much control workers have over their job duties and their opportunities for profit or loss in determining whether they were contractors or employees. So, in other words, I decide when an Uber driver decides when they want to drive and when they don't want to drive. They can decide whether they want to drive in this area or that area. They have the control over how they conduct their job. They don't have a boss telling them what to do. And I think that is an essential element of contractor versus employee.
Right.
They come and go as they wish in many cases. And so now
when they're on a job, they may have to have regulations about what they're doing in that role at that moment.
Right.
They have to keep track of this, or they have to report in on that. But if they're free to take or decline jobs or hours, then that to me is a contractor.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, if you classify them as employees with minimum wage and benefits, you're going to have a lot fewer of these people out there. And companies like, if you rely on Uber or Lyft or DoorDash, and a lot of elderly people rely on Uber and Lyft, by the way, to get around these days. There are fewer taxis, and there are people out there who don't have cars who rely on these to get around. You're going to have a lot fewer of them. They're going to be a lot more expensive.
The cost is going to go really high if you just tie it down to being employer type thing.
Yeah. Yep. So, and then our third headline is from the New York Times, and this is an article titled, "I was addicted to my smartphone, so I switched to a flip phone for a month." And it tells the tale of this journalist who works for the New York Times, who outlines how much time, like a lot of us, how much time she was spending on her iPhone, and she's looking at screen time, and, she was spending more than 5 hours a day on it. And it tells you how many times you picked it up. I was looking at mine. She was saying that it told her she had 100 pickups a day. She picked up her phone to use it 100 times a day. I looked at mine, and I use mine a bit. I mean, I use mine throughout the day. Mine is about 50 times a day. I pick up my phone, but I have more hours in use. But I think that's because I play podcasts through it all day. I noticed that it had my Overcast as the
your
hours
top
and hours.
app.
Yeah, hours and hours and hours a day. So I'm not physically holding the phone, but I do use it more than I want. So she's decided to have an experiment. Go to a phone that only does phone calls. It's like the old style. It makes phone calls. You can text, but you have to do that with only the 9 keys or the 10 keys, 10 key texting. You hit the 1 key 3 times to get a C, that whole thing. And she did it for a month, and kind of relates what it was like. And the problems, we are definitely in a time where we are reliant on these phones for a lot of things. She couldn't charge her electric car because it requires an app to get the charger started. She couldn't log into the New York Times content management system because it requires a 2-factor authentication. However, she found that she was spending more time reading books, and her child said that she was spending more time talking to her child and playing games with her even. And she was more likely to make a phone call and talk to someone at length, having heart-to-heart conversations rather than a quick text that you throw off here and there. On the other hand, she found that she would have to leave voicemails for people when she would have previously texted, and some people weren't listening to the voicemails. So good and bad. But Pat, what do you think? I mean, Joe, should we all have a flip phone that we switch to for a month to kind of break our bad habits?
I think it's a little extreme. You could do something like I'll get an iPhone and not put any other apps on it, just the stock phone. And then you could kind of probably accomplish the same thing. And so that's the thought. And I know some people like for Lent have talked about removing all their game apps and removing all their news apps and just keeping certain things on the phone just to help them to discipline. I don't think you need to go to a flip phone. For one thing, they're becoming a little bit extinct. There's not as many of them around anymore.
Although they say they're kind of coming back because there are more and more younger people. The article talks about there are more and more younger people who grew up with a smartphone. You know, they got a smartphone when they were 11 or 12, and now they're in their young adult era, and they're like, I don't want to be bound to this. I want a dumb phone. And so you're starting to see more and more of them out there. But you're right.
Oh, really?
You know, one of the things they talk about in the article that researchers have found is that even if you switch your phone from full color to grayscale, which you can do in the accessibility,
right,
it makes you less likely it makes the phone less attractive, less likely to pick up your phone, which is, you know, interesting. And I know a lot of people do that for Lent. They go gray for Lent.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
right.
It's interesting to think about. Like things like it kind of, some of the stuff she talks about takes me back. Like when you needed directions, she would have to go to Google Maps and print them out. Remember printing out MapQuest directions back in the day?
Yeah.
My glove box would be filled with old directions from places I've been.
I had the Mapsco maps, you know, the great big old books that I carried around with me. And that was, of course, then there's the foldable maps that I used to, that was before the Mapsco even.
Yep.
Where you just every city would have their own map and you just had to have the ones for all the places that you were going to be going.
Yeah, I remember going on my honeymoon in 2005. I always mix that up. 2005 when we had the AAA triptychs to drive all the way up to Nova Scotia.
I loved the triptychs.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved them.
They don't do them anymore, you know, because no one needs them. Right. That was actually the subject of a funny scene in a Mark Wahlberg movie that was on Apple TV recently, Apple TV Plus, where he was a undercover secret agent, and even his family didn't know, and they were being tracked by people trying to kill him, and so he had to throw away all of their phones, and so they were completely reliant on old technology. So he goes to the equivalent of a AAA, and he's trying to get a triptych, and the guy's like, we don't have that. Like he goes to an old file cabinet and blows the dust off, and you know the whole thing. It was pretty funny.
Hilarious. Well, I think it's good to be mindful, and that, you know, her experiment reminds us we need to be mindful about what we're doing, and maybe look at it as an opportunity to scale back what is not benefiting us.
Right. Turn off more notifications. Be more intentional about when you pick it up. Take certain apps off the phone that are the type of app that you might get sucked into. Social media apps are especially notorious for that. I'm the same way. There's a couple I should probably delete off my phone, at least for Lent and maybe longer. We'll see. I do more book reading. Very good. So, and of course we'll have links to all these stories in our show notes. But as we move on, it is time for our picks of the week. And Pat, you would be as the host, I go last. So Pat, you are up first. What is your pick this week?
Well, I've had some people that were concerned when they go to download something that is it safe or that type of thing. And there is a website out there that I was reminded of recently called Virus Total, that you can take a file that you were downloading or even a URL and submit it to there, and it will tell you whether it's safe or not. It runs it through about 25 different antivirus programs, to let you know whether this looks safe or which ones pinged it, and maybe that was because of advertising stuff as opposed to viral stuff, etc. So I will put that link in the show notes. But I found that for a lot of my people these days, security and safety is becoming a lot more important to them as they get hacked.
Right. So that's really good. Yeah, it's being more mindful of the stuff that you're downloading and more, intentional about making sure that stuff is safe. That's really important. Very good. So mine is, I'm trying to remember if I mentioned this. It might have been on my list of things to talk about at some point, but there's a website called eSIMDB. I think I have talked about it, where you can, most modern smartphones now use eSIMs, electronic SIMs. They don't use the physical SIM cards anymore. And one of the things, when you travel, like if you travel overseas, you get there, you don't necessarily want to use your home data, phone and data plan, because they'll often have international plans, but they're really expensive. And maybe you want to get a local plan for data. And maybe if you're traveling in a group or with family, you want to be able to text each other, locally, or use shared data or that sort of thing. So you get an eSIM when you get to the country of your choice, or that sort of thing. But and eSIMDB.com is a great place to shop for those. But I have a different tip, which is, I have Mint Mobile as my my carrier of choice for my phone. I had AT&T before that, and I often found myself at times unable to get online with my phone. Now, I do a lot of scouting events, BSA scouts, and a lot of these events take place in the woods, far away from everything else. And I would often have trouble getting online. And then I'd run into someone else, and they're online. Like, what do you have? Oh, I have Verizon. I have a signal here. Oh, I wish I had Verizon at this moment that I could get online, or various things like that. So what I realized is I could get an eSIM for when I'm traveling inside the U.S. to places where there are not good signals for my carrier. So I found Nomad at getnomad.app, and it's a very reasonably priced service. And what they do is they'll sell you an eSIM of various denominations, and you can get different amounts of data over different periods of time. You can get it for a week, you can get it for a month, you get 10 gigs, 5 gigs. It's all all these different amounts. You can get a data plan, you can get an SMS plan. So, for example, if let's see, in the US, so they can do international plans, but in the US, I can get a data plan that right now 10 gigs for 30 days for $20. But usually what I do is I get a shorter plan. Like I do, if I'm just going for the weekend, I get a 7-day plan and a gig of data, or I'll get like a 5 gig plan for $14, which is a 30 days. If I'm, going to summer camp or just going for a weekend camping. And one of the nice things about it is the eSIM it works on some of them work on multiple carriers. So it'll connect to the best signal where you're at. So if the best signal is on AT&T, it'll connect to AT&T. If the best signal is on Verizon, it'll connect to Verizon, and so on. And so I find this to be really great. And the setup, at least on the iPhone, and I'm sure on Android too, is really great, because you get the app, or you can do it on their website, and then it walks you through setting up the second eSIM. And so it doesn't replace your primary number.
That's what I was wondering, was whether it was a replacement, but it's an additional.
It's additional. So most phones can have, phones made in the last few years can have up at least 2 eSIMs. Some can even do 3 eSIMs, which is, I'm not sure. There must be circumstances for people who travel a lot where that would be necessary. But you can do 2 eSIMs, and you can switch back and forth between them in the settings. And you can say, this is my primary and this is my secondary, and switch between whichever one has the better signal, or turn off this one now, because I'm now in an area that this doesn't work well in, and turn on the secondary eSIM, and just use that while I'm here. It's really, again, it really works great. There's this one camp that we go to all the time with the scouts, and I would always be offline, and not that I need to be surfing Facebook, but I want to message the other scout leader across camp, or that sort of thing. Or I want to tell my wife at home that we're going to be late coming back, or that sort of thing. I want to be connected, that at least that much, and so. Having that ability to get online was important to me. And so check it out. Nomad isn't the only one like this, but this is the one that I've used, that I've had good luck with. Nomad, getnomad.app is the site. And yeah, it's a different way of using these eSIMs. Most people think of it just traveling overseas, but I think, it can be very useful traveling inside your country as well.
Very cool.
So, and that'll do it for us this time. And we'd love to get your feedback on anything we talked about today, which you can do by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/technology, or the StarQuest Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to technology@sqpn.com. Visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. You can find links from our discussion and our picks of the week on our show notes at starquest.fm/TEC244. Write a review of the show in Apple Podcasts or any of the podcast directories that allow it. And please share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow this community and reach more listeners. Until next time, Pat Scott, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of technology.
Glad to be here.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Technology on StarQuest.